Orba, who said like fat is a feminist issue. I haven't actually read that book, I will be upfront about that. Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah and I love to talk about books. And this week, a week later than it should have been, is my June wrap up. I had actually meant to do this last week and then do my mid-year freakout tag this week, but I got it the wrong way around and I'm now filming this at like 8 o'clock on Friday night and it needs to be up for tomorrow morning, so I better get a shifty on. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you'll know that I hit a bit of a reading slump in kind of April-May time, but happy to report that I seem to get my reading mojo back in June. So I read 7.5-ish books in June, but I'm not allowed to talk about 3.5 of those because they're for the BookTube Prize non-fiction semi-final, which I'm judging, and the results of that won't be live until I think the start of August. So I'm going to do a separate video where I wrap up all the books that I've read for the BookTube Prize and give you my thoughts on them then. So those books were Cast by Isabel Wilkerson, The Address Book by Deirdre Mask, Our Bodies, Their Battlefield by Christina Lamb, and then I also started, I always mess this one up, The Giants, no, The Dragons, The Giant, The Women by Waiatu Moore. So those, plus the other books that I'll be reading for the prize, will be in a separate wrap up in August. So on to the books that I can talk about. And I'm going to start with the one that I enjoyed most, and this one ended up being a 5-star read. It was The Art of Dying by Ambrose Parry, which is the second book in the Raven, Fisher and Simpson series. I read the first one, which is The Way of All Flesh, last year, and I think it's testament to how much I enjoyed that not only have I gone on to read this second instalment, but I also have the third one lined up too. And that's a big thing for me, as I don't generally read series at all, but this one just appeals to me and satisfies me on so many levels. It's set in 1800s Edinburgh, and it follows a young obstetrician. Well, he's a doctor, but he's primarily an obstetrician, called Will Raven, as he not only goes about his day job and all that entails as an apprentice to the eminent Dr. Simpson, but also as he kind of stumbles into solving murders alongside housemaid turned medical assistant Sarah Fisher. And it's done so in the really capable hands of Ambrose Parry, which is a pen name for husband and wife writing team Christopher Brockmeyer, who is known for his tartan noir. He's got a wicked dark sense of humour that I can remember. I've read one of his books years and years ago. And then his wife, Dr. Marissa Hartzman, she's a consultant anaesthetist and has a real passion for medical history. And you can absolutely see where those kind of two sides come together in the Ambrose Parry books. So in The Art of Dying, a year has passed since the first book where Will and Sarah met their first kind of medic with a taste for murder. And a lot has changed in that year, and not just the fact that Will has gone kind of gallivanting across Europe under the guise of gaining more medical training. So he's come back to work with Dr. Simpson in like an elevated position. And right from the beginning of this book, we hear from the murderer, or should I say murderess, because she tells us who she's killed and she reflects on those experiences. And so we as the reader, we're always that one step ahead of Will and Sarah as they first notice these patterns of death and start to clue in that something sinister is afoot. And these books are so good. They're incredibly well written. They've got dark humour that I absolutely love, but it's balanced out with historic facts. And I thought that this book, like I said, it's the second in the series, and I thought it was just as good as the first one. The atmosphere and the murky Edinburgh of the 1800s, it's really tangible. The medical procedures in it are just as grim and gory, so I will warn you about that. And the fabulous twist at the end was really good as well. I was only just steps ahead of it. I can definitely see me keeping pace with this series if it develops beyond the third book, which is something I don't think has ever happened in my my reading life, at least not my adult reading life before. I really enjoy these books. They're dark, they're funny, they are a lot of fun as well, and I just really enjoyed it. The next book I read was Earthed by Rebecca Schiller, and this book had actually been on my radar. So when I saw that it was available to request on NetGalley, I jumped at the chance because it kind of spoke to a lot of things that I'm interested in reading about at the moment. So women at a certain point in their life, women who are facing mental health issues, and I am keen to get a bit more nature in my reading. And this book seemed to bring all of those elements together. This is Schiller's memoir of when her family, they sold up their home in London and they moved to a small holding in Kent with dreams of, you know, the idyllic growing your own food, raising your animals and all of that. But it turns out to be a much harder undertaking than her and her family anticipated. And Rebecca ends up taking on a lot of the responsibilities and the work of running this small holding herself alongside her own work and raising her children. She burns herself out and into this frenzy of anxiety and stress. And either because of that or, you know, simply because there are other things going on in the background for her anyway, she experiences a real disintegration in her mental health. But paradoxically, in order to cope and to heal, she uses that contact with the earth and that time in her garden. And she also uses the history of the house and land through the women who came before her to help her cope and heal. I'm not sure if you can have spoilers for memoirs. If you want them, they're in one of my previous shelf indulgence videos, so I will link that here. But in my wrap up, I won't say what diagnosis Rebecca ends up pursuing. But what I will say is that I found this section fascinating, as it's the first time I've read of a woman exploring this particular condition, and it spoke to me so much. Because I have been aware it's an emerging area, I think, particularly for women and girls. And from a personal perspective, it's something that I found really interesting to read about. And Schiller is introspective, and she's also incredibly deft at putting into words the way her mind works, how she views herself and how her thought processes develop. And so that, in the context of this diagnosis that she seeks, was really fascinating. And so I really enjoyed this book. She has reference points that are probably a bit more cultured than mine. I didn't always connect with what she was saying, but that didn't take away from what I got from this book. I think her writing style is really rich. And at times, particularly when she's discussing the women, and so these are either actual researched women or how she imagines them to be, and they inhabited the land before her. When she's talking about those, it's almost lyrical. And I like that she could have that element, but then also a much more real voice when she's talking about her everyday life. You know, she can be quite direct and honest, particularly when she's talking about her children or the thoughts in her head, and when it came to her relationship with her husband. I'm not sure how he'd feel about how he's portrayed in this book, but I do think he should count himself lucky that she didn't apply a bit more reflection than she did to that particular aspect. I thought he came across as really just, he's not engaged with the small holding, and I don't think he's particularly supportive of her at times. But anyway, this book is definitely mental health first and nature second, but the nature that she does write about is really informative, but also incredibly beautiful. She's got a really elegant writing style, but it's elegant in a way that opens her up rather than keeping you at arm's length. And actually, I was thinking I would love a further memoir from her, you know, a few years down the line, to see where she goes from here, both in terms of her mental health and her diagnosis, and also the future of her small holding, whether she keeps it going and how that develops, or whether she takes a bit of a different route through life. I'd be really interested to hear about that. My next book that I want to talk about is Snow in May. This was a Shelterbox book club pick, but I'm well out of the loop with that. This is a collection of short stories that are linked by the fact that they are either set in, or the character comes from a town called Magadan, which is a really isolated town in the far kind of Siberian northeast. Is that right? Yes, northeast of Russia, and it's known mainly because it's where Stalin had his gulags, the labor camps. And so some of the characters are in Magadan because they've come out of those camps and either can't, they don't want to move somewhere else, or they can't because they are restricted to where they can travel and things like that, or they've got nothing to go back to. Other people are in Magadan through choice for employment or whatever. The stories, I think they span the decades of the latter half of the 20th century. And like I said, they're linked through Magadan, but also sometimes you'll see characters coming up in other stories, or it will be the same character but for a different point in their life. And I really like linked short stories, so I love that aspect of this. And on the whole, I felt like every story in this collection started really strongly. I was fascinated by the insight that I got from them into life behind the Iron Curtain, or in some cases life after the curtain had been drawn back. Particularly in terms like the role of art is quite strong in this. There are dancers and musicians and things. It also touches on like the lack of availability of goods and foods, and the lengths that people had to go to obtain certain items. And it also touches on things like how party affiliations shaped people's lives and opportunities. I think she draws her characters really well, and for the most part, I was invested in their stories. However, like, I kind of felt some of the stories seem to like peter out or end quite abruptly, and I don't always need a resolution in a short story, but there was sometimes like a sense of a story running out of steam or just cutting out. And even if that character appeared in a further story, there wasn't really a continuation of how we'd met them previously. But despite that, I did enjoy this collection. It had that kind of bleak coldness that matched the setting underneath, but at the same time it was kind of teeming with human life. And I guess that's how I now imagine Magadan to be as well. So yeah, a bit of a mixed bag, but I enjoyed it well enough. And then the last book that I read that I can talk about is Fat and Queer, an anthology of queer and trans bodies and lives. I hope I've got that right. I seem to mess it up every time, but you'll be able to see it on the screen just now. And this basically does what it says on the tin. It's queer and trans people discussing their experiences of living in a fat body. There are short stories, there are poems, and there are essays in this collection. There's so many lifestyles, sexualities, gender identities, and kind of points on the, I don't know, like body loathing to body positivity spectrum. They're all represented in this collection. I think it's been incredibly well curated. And like I said in one of my shelf indulgence videos, as someone who's lived in a lot of different sized bodies and who has been living in a fat one for a number of years now, you know, something I mainly struggle with, but I've always been aware that fat is an identity as well as, you know, just a measure of your adiposity, whether it's an identity that we've actually chosen or it's one which is kind of foisted upon us by society. And although I'm neither queer nor trans, I'm also aware of those being identities too. But what I probably haven't appreciated were the intersections of those identities and how that intersectionality means that being fat and queer or trans is not only different from being a normal weight and either queer or straight or trans or cis, but it's also different from being fat and straight or cis. You know, as a fat, straight, cis woman, I do have some commonality with fat, queer and trans people, but they're also dealing with things that I don't have to face, whether that's, you know, in their own communities or out in wider society. And on top of that, this collection also has like a variety of racial and cultural representation, which adds like another intersection as well. So it's been a fascinating window onto how other people are seen and how they see themselves. And essentially how there isn't just one fat experience. There are all these other elements that shape how someone experiences being fat. So as with any collection, like it's, especially this one, because it's got a lot of different contributors, it's really unlikely that every piece is going to hit with a reader the same way. So there were ones that I definitely thought were stronger than others. But on the whole, I found like this was a collection that gave me a lot to think about, and I think really that was the main purpose of the editors. Oh, I never even said who it's edited by. It's edited by like 1 million people, and I'll put that on the screen because I've forgotten to write it down to have it in front of me. But yeah, I think primarily this is like it's a political statement. Was it Susie Orbach who said like fat is a feminist issue? I haven't actually read that book, I will be upfront about that. I've always meant to, just never got hold of a copy of it. But yeah, I think when you live in a body that is, you know, outside of the accepted norms, it does become politicized. And obviously the writers in this collection, they are politicized in a lot of different ways, as well as in the sense of being fat. And I think by putting this collection out there, it is making a statement, a really important statement. And I think that's what I got most from this collection, rather than being like an outstanding piece of literature or whatever. Although, like I said, there were some really great standout bits, and there was nothing in it that I thought was poor. But like, I've tried. I just don't get poetry a lot of the time. So, you know, I did fail to connect a bit with like poetry and things like that. But I'm waffling now. I've forgotten the point I'm trying to make. Yes. So this is a strong collection. It's an interesting collection, but above and beyond that, it's an important statement. So did any of that make sense? Who knows? Who cares? I read it. You should read it. The end. It feels very weird to only be talking about 4 books in my wrap up. I feel like I've forgotten something, but there definitely, it is just, I think it is. I'm pretty sure it's just because I'm not allowed to talk about the BookTube prize one. So I feel like I've flown through it today. If you're eagle-eyed, well, not so eagle-eyed because it's quite noticeable, you might notice I've done something to my face. I did a thing that I've wanted to do since I was probably quite young, and I don't know why I never did it. Like, so I do have like piercings in my ears and things, but I have had a lot more piercings in my life. I've had my lip, I've had my tongue, I've had more in my ears, very briefly my eyebrow, and for some reason, although I've always really wanted one, I never got my nose done. And then I worked in the NHS for years, and it just never seemed to be the right time, and I wasn't sure if my husband would have particularly liked me with a nose piercing. I know, you don't even need to point out the fallacy of that thought. But yeah, so this week I decided to get my nose pierced. So it is looking a bit, it is a bit tender, but I think more of that is because I haven't put any makeup around it because I'm scared of getting makeup on it. So it does look as if it's a bit red around it. It's fine. I'm hoping it's fine. I have pulled it out twice in my sleep already. So, and I know that the nose is quite a difficult one to heal, and I do often take a long time to heal. Like, I don't think my lip ever healed. It drove me crazy until I finally took it out. And I had to get rid of some of my ear ones because they never healed as well. I'm just not particularly good at getting piercings, but I'm really hoping this one heals because I love it. I think it looks so cool. I can't wait to downsize and have just a smaller piece of jewellery in it once it's healed, if it heals. So yeah, I'm having like a teenage rebellion in my mid to late 30s, and it feels kind of good, guys. I think more tattoos is definitely next when I've got some spare cash, but it's a lot cheaper to get a piercing than it is to get a tattoo. Anyway, I just wanted to address the elephant on my nose because this has nothing to do with books and reading. And I don't know why I'm trying to prolong this video, because really I've hardly got any time to edit it as it is. I should be like, yes, done it. Go edit, get it uploaded. And so that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I don't know if any of you will have read any of these books. Have I managed to sell any of them to you? Let me know in the comments below. And until next time, bye. Especially with a really important and oh my god, why can't I talk today?